The first thing I remember is the ceiling. Not my ceiling at home. The one with the hairline crack near the window I keep meaning to fix, but a different ceiling. Smooth, white, buzzing with fluorescent light. And then a sound. That steady mechanical beep. And the smell. Antiseptic and something underneath it. Something sterile and cold. I didn't know where I was for about 30 seconds. Then I did. The nurse's name was Patrice. She was the first face I saw, and she was leaning over me with the careful expression of someone who has had to deliver difficult news many times and has learned to soften it without hiding it. "You're at mercy, General," she said. "You've been with us for 3 days." 3 days. I turned that over in my mind the way you turn over a stone and find nothing underneath it. Just empty soil. "Your son," she said. "We tried to reach him. I waited. We called him 23 times. She said it gently, the way you'd tell someone their plant died while they were on vacation. Matter of fact, but careful. I remember thinking, 23 times. Someone sat at a desk or stood at a nurse's station and dialed my son's number 23 times. Someone tried that hard on my behalf for a person they'd never met, and he never picked up. I should tell you how I got there. It was a Wednesday morning in October, the kind of day where the light comes in sideways and everything looks a little golden and temporary. I was at the grocery store, the Kroger on Elmfield Road, the one I've been going to since before my son was born. I had 11 things in my cart. I remember because I was in the express lane and I remember counting. I reached for a box of oatmeal on the top shelf and then nothing. That's what a cardiac event feels like when you're 67 years old and standing alone in a grocery store. Not pain, not at first. Just a sudden absence, like someone turned down the volume on the world. My hand on the shelf. The oatmeal box. Then the floor coming up to meet me very fast. I woke up in the ambulance with a paramedic pressing something cold to my arm and saying my name. My name is Josephine, but everyone who loves me calls me Joe. The paramedic didn't know that. He called me Josephine, and I thought, that's a stranger's voice. That's what it sounds like when nobody who loves you is nearby. At the hospital, they found the blockage, emergency surgery, and then 3 days in a medically induced state while my body figured out if it wanted to stay or go. It stayed, obviously. Or I wouldn't be telling you this. What I want to tell you about my son before I tell you the rest is that I did everything right. I know every mother says that. I know that's the most contested sentence in the English language. But I mean it the way I can say it now, on the other side of all of this. I gave him what I had. After my husband passed, when my son was 19, I held everything together. I worked full-time at the insurance office. I paid his college tuition, or most of it. I showed up to every graduation, every apartment move, every new city. When he married Renata, I'm sorry, I should say his wife, I welcomed her. I learned her food allergies. I learned how she takes her coffee. I bit my tongue so many times in the first 2 years that I'm surprised I have one left. His name is Todd. He's 41. He works in software sales. He lives 4 hours away in Nashville, which isn't that far. It is not that far. I want you to understand that before we continue. When Patrice told me about the 23 calls, I didn't cry. I don't know why. Maybe I was still too medicated. Maybe some part of me wasn't surprised. There had been a distance building between Todd and me for a while. Quiet, like fog. The kind you don't notice until you can't see anything anymore. Holidays where he'd confirm at the last minute. Birthdays I'd mention in passing, and he'd reference later as if he'd known all along. A general sense that I existed in his life the way a piece of old furniture exists. Useful if he needed it, and visible if he didn't. But 23 calls. I lay there in that hospital bed with the IV in my arm and I thought about him on the other end of a ringing phone. Seeing the hospital number, seeing it again and again, 23 times over 3 days. And I thought about what decision you make 23 times to press decline. You don't accidentally miss 23 calls. That is a choice. You make it once and then you keep making it. The second face I saw after Patrice's was not someone I expected. Her name is Wren. She's my neighbor from the duplex across the alley. She moved in about 8 months before this happened, and we'd exchanged maybe 50 words total. She'd helped me carry in groceries once when I had too many bags. I'd given her a casserole dish when her oven broke. That was the extent of our relationship. But someone at the hospital, I found out later it was the woman who found me on the floor of the Kroger, a retired teacher named June who goes to the same church as Wren. Someone called someone who called Wren, and Wren came. She was sitting in the chair beside my bed when I was fully conscious enough to notice her. She had a paperback book face down on her knee and a cup of hospital coffee, and she looked up when I stirred and said simply, "Hey, you're back." Not "oh, thank God." Not a performance. Just, "Hey, you're back." I burst into tears. I don't fully understand why that's the thing that broke me open. 23 unanswered calls didn't do it. Wren saying 2 words did. Maybe because it was so quiet. Maybe because she wasn't owed anything to me and she came anyway and she just said "you're back" like it was the most natural thing. Like of course she was there. Like where else would she be? She stayed for 4 hours that day. She came back the next morning with a real coffee from the place down the street and a crossword puzzle book because she'd noticed I had one on my nightstand at home once when she dropped something off. She noticed that. Todd called on the 4th day after my surgery, the day after I was fully conscious. I was sitting up in bed, my phone lit up, and there was his name, and I sat there and I looked at it for a long moment. I picked up. "Mom." His voice had that quality it gets when he's uncomfortable. A forced lightness, like he's auditioning for the role of concerned son. "I just heard. I'm so sorry we were in Hilton Head for Renata's cousin's wedding and it was a whole thing. The service was spotty. The doctors called you 23 times, I said. Silence. They use the hospital line. Those calls go through on any carrier. More silence. Todd. "I know," he said. "I know. I was trying to. It was a bad time, and Renata's family was all there, and I didn't want to." "You didn't want to what?" He didn't answer that. He pivoted, the way he does, into logistics and forward motion. Was I okay? What did the doctor say? Was I going to need anything when I got home? When was I being discharged? I answered his questions in the same tone I would use to speak to an insurance adjuster. Politely. Accurately. Without warmth. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while. Outside my window there was a tree that had already gone to orange, and a few leaves came loose while I watched. I thought about Hilton Head. I thought about service being spotty. I thought about every family gathering I had ever attended, where my phone had full bars, where I had been available, where I had shown up. I didn't cry again. I just made a note of it somewhere deep in myself, the way you mark a place on a map. He came to visit the day I was discharged. He drove down from Nashville, which I will give him credit for. He was there when Wren helped me into the hospital lobby with my discharge paperwork and my little bag of personal items, and he had brought flowers, yellow chrysanthemums, which are my least favorite flower, but he has never remembered that, and he hugged me in a way that felt like he was relieved to see me functional, the way you're relieved when your car starts. Wren shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him. He thanked her in that vague, general way people thank strangers who've done something they feel guilty about. The way you thank the tow truck driver when you should have called yourself. He stayed for 2 nights. He fixed the leaking faucet in my bathroom, which I'll admit needed doing. He had coffee with me in the mornings. He was not unkind, but he was also never still. He was always half in a conversation with someone on his phone, or stepping outside to take a call, or reminding me that he had to get back, that work was busy, that Renata was managing the kids alone. Kids. 2 grandchildren I see at Christmas if I'm lucky. On the second morning, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table with his coffee and his particular expression, the one I've seen since he was a teenager. the one that means he's about to bring up money. Mom, he said, I've been thinking, this house is a lot for you to maintain on your own. And you know the market right now is, I know what the market is, Todd. I'm just saying, if you sold, you'd have a real cushion. You could move somewhere smaller, or closer to us, or even what? He shrugged. There are some really nice communities, active adult communities. It's not like it used to be. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and looked at him. This house. My house. 3 bedrooms and a front porch, and a garden I have tended for 22 years. My husband built the raised beds in the backyard the summer before he got sick. I grew tomatoes in them every year since. You could sell this house right now for somewhere in the neighborhood of $340,000. And I know that because I had an appraisal done last year, and I am not, despite what my son apparently believes, unaware what I own. I'll think about it, I said. He seemed satisfied with that. He left the next morning, and I stood on the front porch and watched his car pull out, and I had a feeling I cannot entirely name. Not grief, exactly. Not anger. Something underneath both of those. Like the ground shifting just slightly. Just enough to remind you it can. Wren was in her yard across the alley pulling up the last of her summer herbs, and she looked up when she heard the car. You okay? She called. Getting there, I said. She came over later with soup. Just knocked, handed me the container, said eat something, and left. That was it. No performance. No asking to come in and talk about it. Just soup. I ate the soup standing at my kitchen counter and looked out the window at the raised beds and thought about my husband and thought about what I was going to do next. Here is what I found out. 3 weeks later, my neighbor on the other side, a man named Clifford who has lived there for 15 years and whom I trust completely, mentioned to me, conversationally, that Todd had called him. Clifford, a little confused, told me that Todd had asked him some questions about the house, about whether I'd had any other health incidents recently, about whether I seemed to be managing. Clifford had answered honestly because he didn't know there was any reason not to. I sat with that information for a day. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Donna, and she's been my attorney since I refinanced this house 8 years ago, and she's very good at reading between lines. I told her about the surgery, about Todd's visit, about the conversation at the kitchen table, about Clifford's call. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Joe, has Todd ever been listed anywhere in your estate documents? Yes, he had. As primary beneficiary of everything, which was the standard arrangement which I had set up 15 years ago and never revisited. Do you want to revisit it? Donna asked. I thought about 23 calls. I thought about chrysanthemums. I thought about active adult communities. I thought about Hilton Head. Yes, I said. I do. I want to be honest about this part, because it would be easy to make it simpler than it was. I didn't make those changes in anger. I want to be clear about that. I made them in clarity. There's a difference, and it matters. Anger is hot and it fades. Clarity is what's left when the heat goes. And in the clarity, what I saw was a person who had chosen 23 times not to answer, who had come to my house with yellow chrysanthemums and immediately started asking about the property value, who had called my neighbor to gather information without telling me. That is not a son taking care of his mother. That is someone keeping an eye on an asset. I changed the documents. I left Todd a specific and legal acknowledgement, which Donna suggested because it forecloses certain challenges, and I redistributed everything else, some to a literacy nonprofit I volunteered with for 6 years, some to my cousin's daughter who was putting herself through nursing school and whom I see more in a month than I see Todd in a year, and a meaningful something for Wren. I did not tell Todd I'd done this. The call came on a Tuesday evening in February, 4 months after the surgery. I was in the backyard. It had been an unseasonably warm day, and I was out looking at the raised beds, thinking about what I wanted to plant in the spring. Tomatoes again, obviously. Maybe some basil this year. Maybe something new. My phone rang and it was Todd and I answered. He had heard, somehow. I still don't know exactly how. Maybe through Clifford, maybe through the attorney's office processing a routine document, maybe through the particular instinct people develop when money is involved. Mom. His voice was different. The lightness was gone. I heard you changed your will. I did, I said. Why would you do that without telling me? I didn't realize I needed your permission. That's not what He stopped, started again. Mom, is this about the hospital thing? Because I explained that. The service was, Todd, I said. Stop. He stopped. I love you, I said. I will always love you. You're my son and nothing changes that. The garden was very quiet. A bird moved in the oak tree at the back fence. But love is not the same thing as inheritance, and I have been thinking very carefully about what I have and where it goes and what it means, and I made the decision that felt right to me. That is my right. Mom. I'd like to talk to you again sometime. When you're ready to talk about something other than this. I ended the call. I stood in the garden for a while after that. The light was going and the air had that particular quality it gets in February when the cold comes back at dusk. Thin and clear. I could hear Wren's television through her open window. I could smell whatever she was making for dinner. I was 67 years old, and I had survived a cardiac event alone in a grocery store, and 3 days in a hospital, and a son who answered my love with arithmetic. And I was standing in my own garden, in my own soil, next to beds that my husband built. And I was, this is the only word for it, okay. Not healed. Not finished, but okay. I planted tomatoes in April, and basil, and something new. A climbing rose along the back fence that I've been wanting for years and always talked myself out of. Wren helped me get the trellis in. She brought over her drill because mine had a dead battery, and we spent a Saturday afternoon working on it, and she told me about her grandmother's garden in Georgia, and I told her about my husband. And it was the first time I'd talked about him to anyone in maybe 2 years without feeling that underwater pressure behind my eyes. Todd and I have spoken twice since February. Briefly. Carefully. The way you speak across a distance that is real but possibly not permanent. I don't know what happens next with him. I have stopped trying to predict it. Some things you just hold open, like a door in summer, and you see what comes through. What I know is this. When I was lying on that hospital floor, before the paramedics, before the ambulance, before the steady beep of the machines, a woman named June Albright, whom I had never met, knelt down beside me on the linoleum of the grocery store and took my hand. She stayed with me until the ambulance came. She called her friend, who called her friend, who called Wren. She did this for a stranger. I think about that a lot. I think about the chains of care that exist between people who have no obligation to each other. I think about the way Wren came to that hospital and sat beside me with a paperback and a bad coffee and said simply, "You're back." And I think about how that was the most loved I had felt in a very long time. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it is the person who answers. Sometimes it is the person who comes. My name is Josephine, but everyone who loves me calls me Joe. I'm still here, and for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to earn something. Not in the financial sense, though that's part of it, and I won't pretend it isn't. I mean earning in the older, quieter sense. The way you earn someone's trust. The way you earn the right to be in someone's life when things go sideways. You don't earn that with a title. You don't earn it with blood relation. You earn it by showing up when showing up costs you something. Todd didn't show up. And I think what took me the longest to sit with wasn't the anger. Anger is easy. Anger has energy to it. But the grief underneath it, because I had to accept something I'd been slowly circling for years without letting myself land on it. My son had quietly decided that my value to him was conditional, not cruel, not calculating in some dramatic way. Just conditional. And conditions have a way of becoming visible in a crisis. You find out what things are made of when pressure is applied. 23 calls. That's what the pressure revealed. I don't think Todd is a bad person. I've turned that over many times and I keep coming back to the same place. He is a person who made choices, small ones, for years, that accumulated into a version of himself he may not have intended. Every time he put the phone face down, every time he told himself I'd be fine, every time he let distance do the work of a difficult conversation, those were choices. They built something, and when I finally saw clearly what they'd built, I had to decide what I was going to do with that information. What I've learned, what I actually believe now, from inside this experience rather than outside it, is that clarity is its own form of courage. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel triumphant. It just settles in, quietly, and it changes the way you see things, and then it changes what you do. Ren didn't know me. She had no reason to come to that hospital. She came because she is the kind of person who, when faced with a choice between easy and right, chooses right. Not dramatically, not for recognition, just as a matter of who she is. That's character. And character, I've learned, is just the sum of your small decisions. The ones nobody is watching. The ones that don't seem to matter at the time. I planted the climbing rose because I've been talking myself out of it for years. Too much work. Too ambitious. What if it doesn't take? And I realized that's exactly the kind of thinking that quietly shrinks a life. You don't tend a garden by planting only what you're certain will survive. You plant what you want to see grow, and then you show up for it every day. And that's the whole philosophy right there. I'm still here. That's not nothing. That's in fact everything.